Hola? What's the weather like where you are today? Sunny, rainy, cloudy? Comment below.
I never thought coming home from law school after 3 grueling years filled with endless nights poring over case law and debating constitutional principles in smoke-filled study groups would feel quite like stepping into a personal courtroom where I served as both the accused and the reluctant arbiter of my own fate. Yet there I found myself seated at the familiar oak dining table in our modest colonial home in Springfield, Illinois, fork poised over a plate of pot roast that my mother had prepared with the same meticulous care she always applied to family gatherings, ready to announce not just my academic triumphs, but also the unexpected twist of my pregnancy that had taken root during those final hectic months of internships and exam preparations. The evening had started with all the warmth I had anticipated during my long train ride back from Chicago, where visions of my father Richard's proud nod and my mother Laura's gentle embrace had sustained me through the rigors of torts and contracts classes, especially since I had not only passed the bar on my first try but also secured a promising clerkship offer at a mid-sized firm that specialized in family law, an irony that now seemed almost prophetic given the news I was about to share. My older sister Rebecca, who had always been the unchallenged star of our family constellation with her rapid ascent through the ranks of a prestigious finance company in the city, complete with her MBA from a top university and a string of accolades that my parents framed on the living room walls like trophies, was absent from the table that night due to her demanding schedule, but her shadow loomed large in every conversation, a constant benchmark against which my own efforts were measured and often found wanting in their eyes. As the meal progressed with casual exchanges about the changing seasons in our quiet Midwest suburb and the latest neighborhood gossip involving the Johnsons' new boat down at the local marina, I waited for the perfect lull in the discussion, my heart racing with a mixture of excitement and trepidation because while the pregnancy had been unplanned, emerging from a whirlwind romance with a mentor figure during a summer clerkship that blurred professional boundaries in ways I hadn't fully anticipated, I viewed it as a bold new beginning that could intertwine my burgeoning legal career with the profound responsibility of motherhood in a society that still judged women for trying to have it all. When the moment arrived, after my father had finished recounting his latest triumphs at the auto parts distribution plant where he had worked for over 30 years, rising from the factory floor to a supervisory role through sheer determination and the overtime hours that left him exhausted but unyielding, I cleared my throat and laid it all out in a steady voice, explaining that I was 3 months along, that the father was someone significant from my professional world, and that despite the surprise, I intended to embrace this chapter fully while pursuing the opportunities that law school had opened for me in a field where resilience was as crucial as intellect. The room fell into a stunned silence broken only by the clink of silverware against plates. And then my father's face transformed from its usual ruddy complexion born of hard labor and hearty meals into a deep crimson hue reminiscent of the overcooked edges of the roast itself, his broad shoulders tensing as he rose halfway from his chair, voice thundering through the dining room like a judge's gavel in a packed courtroom, declaring with unbridled fury that Rebecca remained the true pride of this family, the one who had navigated life's challenges without derailing her path or burdening everyone with such irresponsible decisions, implying through his roared accusations that my situation rendered me little more than a disappointment who had squandered every advantage they had sacrificed to provide. Before I could muster a defense or even process the roasting of his words that cut deeper than any failed exam or rejected application ever had, my mother, who had always been the quieter force in our household, mediating disputes with her soft-spoken wisdom and home-cooked remedies for every ailment, leaned across the table toward me, her eyes averted as if the weight of the revelation was too much to confront directly, and in a whisper that carried the chill of finality, urged me to simply get out, her tone laced with a disappointment that made the air feel thick and suffocating, as though my mere presence had contaminated the sacred routine of our family dinners. Stunned into action by the double blow of rejection from the two people who had shaped my earliest dreams of justice and fairness, I pushed back from the table with a scrape of wood on wood that echoed my fracturing resolve. reaching into my purse for the envelope I had prepared during the train journey home, not a formal resignation from my legal aspirations, but a pointed letter outlining my decision to step away from the suffocating expectations of our family dynamic, subtly alluding to the father's identity in phrases that hinted at connections far closer to home than they might suspect, and I placed it squarely in the center of the table amid the half-eaten meal. Watching it land like an unanswered subpoena before turning on my heel and walking out into the gathering dusk of the suburban street, the front door closing behind me with a decisive click that marked the end of one era and the uncertain dawn of another. The drive to the budget motel on the outskirts of town, where neon signs flickered promises of vacancy against the encroaching night, gave me time to replay the scene in my mind, a bitter chuckle escaping as I considered how my father, who often regaled us with tales of his own youthful indiscretions back in the 80s, dodging responsibilities until he met Mom and straightened out for the sake of stability, had the audacity to condemn me so vehemently without pausing to reflect on his own history that mirrored aspects of my predicament in uncomfortable ways, and in that fleeting moment of clarity amid the dashboard glow, I sensed the seeds of a clever retaliation taking root, one that would expose the hypocrisies woven into the fabric of our family narrative without descending into outright confrontation just yet. Over the following days, as I settled into the motel's sparse accommodations with its threadbare carpets and the distant hum of highway traffic serving as my new lullaby, I focused on practical survival, firing off resumes to legal aid organizations and freelance platforms that valued remote work, all while managing the waves of morning sickness that reminded me of the life growing within me and the high stakes of forging a path independent of the safety net I had once taken for granted. Voicemails from my mother accumulated on my phone, each one delivered in her measured tone that masked deeper turmoil, inquiring about my whereabouts and well-being without directly addressing the elephant of our fractured evening, but I let them sit unanswered, channeling my energy into preparing for the baby's arrival and pondering the contents of that letter, wondering how long it would take them to decipher its veiled references and begin questioning the foundations of their assumptions about loyalty and legacy. One evening, as a steady rain drummed against the motel's thin window pane, casting rippling shadows across the room where I sat reviewing prenatal literature alongside outdated case files, my phone vibrated with an incoming call from an unrecognized number, the voice on the other end emerging hesitant yet unmistakably familiar, laced with urgency as it requested a meeting to discuss matters that could no longer be ignored, leaving me gripping the device tightly while my mind raced with possibilities about who might have finally connected the dots and what revelations awaited in the shadows of our shared history. Staring at the phone in my hand after that cryptic call, which turned out to be a wrong number from some telemarketer peddling extended warranties on cars I couldn't afford to drive these days, left me with a surge of adrenaline that morphed into weary relief, mixed with the nagging suspicion that real confrontations were lurking just beyond the next ringtone. So I set the device on silent and turned my attention to the more immediate chaos of motel living where the air conditioner hummed sporadically against the late summer humidity seeping through the cracks in the window frame, forcing me to confront the reality of how one seemingly harmless flirtation during those intense law school months had escalated into this full-blown upheaval that upended my carefully plotted future in the competitive world of legal practice. The romance itself had unfolded like a plot from one of those cautionary tales we dissected in ethics class, starting innocently enough with coffee meetings to discuss my internship prospects at the firm where he served as a senior partner, his sharp insights into navigating the cutthroat partnerships of Chicago's legal scene drawing me in deeper until late evenings reviewing case files blurred into personal confessions shared over takeout in his office overlooking the city skyline. Moments that felt electric and validating amid the isolation of being a young woman clawing for respect in a field still dominated by old boys networks and subtle biases that no textbook could fully prepare you for. What began as admiration for his experience, honed over 2 decades of high-stakes litigation that included defending major corporations against class action suits, evolved into an attraction that ignored every red flag about power imbalances and professional boundaries, culminating in a night after a celebratory team dinner where the wine flowed freely and inhibitions dissolved, leading to the conception that now anchored my every decision, a secret I guarded not just to shield myself from scandal, but because revealing his identity, someone intertwined with my family's social circle through years of business associations, would shatter more than my reputation. It would expose fractures in relationships that had seemed solid for generations. As the days stretched into a monotonous routine of scrolling through job listings on my laptop while sipping ginger tea to combat the persistent nausea that hit hardest in the mornings, I found myself dodging the persistent outreach from my family, deleting voicemails from my mother that carried the weight of unspoken apologies wrapped in pleas for reconciliation, and ignoring texts from my father that oscillated between curt demands for explanations and rare glimpses of vulnerability about how the plant's latest layoffs were amplifying his stress, all of which only deepened my resentment toward the pedestal they had erected for Rebecca, the sister whose life unfolded like a highlight reel of achievements that overshadowed my own quieter struggles without ever acknowledging the shared genetic lottery or the environmental pressures that shaped us both differently. In a bid to reclaim some agency amid this emotional limbo, I reached out to Sarah, my high school confidant who had traded our suburban dreams for a barista job at a trendy coffee shop in the next town over. Her no-nonsense attitude and history of rolling her eyes at my family's pretensions making her the perfect, unlikely ally for the bold move I contemplated during one particularly restless afternoon when the motel's vending machine coffee tasted like regret, and the walls seemed to close in with memories of holiday dinners where Rebecca's stories stole the spotlight. Over a hurried meet-up at her workplace, where the aroma of fresh brews mingled with the chatter of locals nursing their midweek woes, I confided the bare bones of my situation, omitting the father's name, but emphasizing the sting of parental rejection. And together we hatched a plan for my first taste of revenge that felt as clever as any courtroom strategy one had studied, deciding to craft an anonymous post on the community's online forum that alluded to a certain auto parts supervisor's youthful escapades in the 80s, those rumored dalliances with colleagues that my father had always dismissed as locker room exaggerations, but which Sarah had overheard from her own family connections at the plant, phrasing it just vaguely enough to stir whispers without direct accusations. A digital grenade lobbed into the heart of his self-righteous narrative that had me chuckling inwardly at the irony of using modern technology to unearth buried skeletons in a town still clinging to its analog traditions. Watching the post gain traction from my motel bed later that evening, as notifications pinged about comments speculating on the identity behind the tale and shares rippling through the network of plant workers who knew my father all too well, provided a fleeting satisfaction that bordered on vindication, the kind that made the cheap motel sheets feel a touch less scratchy and the uncertainty of my solo pregnancy seem momentarily conquerable, though a twinge of doubt crept in about whether this petty escalation truly advanced my cause or merely painted me as the villain in their eyes. A choice that even I recognized as impulsive and potentially self-sabotaging given how it could boomerang back through mutual acquaintances in the legal community where reputations traveled faster than case precedents. The growing conflict manifested in subtle ways over the next few days, with Sarah texting updates about sidelong glances at the plant and my father's uncharacteristic silence on social media. But it also amplified my internal dilemmas as prenatal checkups revealed the baby's steady heartbeat, a rhythmic reminder of priorities that transcended family vendettas and forced me to weigh the risks of further isolation against the pull of eventual forgiveness in a culture that valorized blood bonds above all. Those quiet moments of reflection often drifted back to old family vacation photos stored on my phone, the kind from our annual trips to the lake house upstate where group shots captured smiling faces around bonfires, including one recurring figure whose presence now struck me as oddly pivotal, a detail from summers past that hinted at deeper connections I had overlooked in my youth, connections that tied directly to the man whose child I carried and the web of secrets threatening to ensnare us all. Just as I began to formulate my response to the online buzz, steeling myself for possible backlash while browsing apartment options in a neighboring city that offered Better access to legal aid clinics, a sharp knock echoed through the motel door, pulling me from my thoughts to reveal Rebecca standing there unannounced, her city slicker attire clashing with the rundown exterior as she held up a printout of my letter. Her expression a storm cloud of determination and unspoken accusations, demanding entry because whatever puzzle I had left behind demanded immediate solving before it unraveled everything she had worked so hard to maintain. Seeing Rebecca framed in the doorway of my motel room, her perfectly tailored coat slung over one arm and the crumpled printout of my letter clutched in the other like evidence in a deposition she intended to dismantle, immediately transported me back to our childhood squabbles in the cramped upstairs bedroom where she would command the better view of the street while I settled for the drafty corner. A dynamic that foreshadowed how she always seemed to claim the narrative in our family without ever yielding the floor to my quieter ambitions or the complexities that defined my path through law school and beyond. She brushed past me without waiting for an invitation, her heels clicking authoritatively against the worn linoleum as she scanned the cluttered space with a mix of pity and disdain that made the air feel even stuffier. Dropping her bag on the bed and waving the letter like a flag of truce or surrender, depending on how the conversation twisted, her voice cutting through the hum of the air conditioner as she demanded to know what kind of twisted game I was playing by leaving behind those riddles about the father being woven into the fabric of our family history, implying connections that could upend the fragile equilibrium she had cultivated with her high-powered job and the upcoming wedding that my parents treated as the capstone of their sacrifices. I closed the door behind her with a deliberate slowness, buying time to compose my response while my mind raced through the risks of revealing too much too soon, especially since her probing eyes already lingered on the ultrasound photo pinned to the corkboard above my desk, a tangible reminder of the life I carried that she viewed not as a miracle but as a derailment from the straight-line success she embodied in every glossy achievement shared at family gatherings. As we settled into an uneasy standoff, her perched on the edge of the unmade bed and me leaning against the dresser, cluttered with prenatal vitamins and half-finished job applications, the conversation veered into territory that exposed the raw underbelly of our sibling rivalry, with Rebecca launching into a monologue about how my dramatic exit and the subsequent online whispers, those anonymous posts that had clearly reached her ears through mutual friends in the plant's social circle, were exacerbating Dad's stress levels to the point where his doctor had warned about potential heart issues, all while Mom buried herself deeper in her community garden club activities, as if tending to petunias could prune away the thorns of our fractured dynamic. I countered with a measured retort laced with the dry humor that had sustained me through late-night cramming sessions, pointing out how ironic it was that she, the golden child who jetted off to conferences in New York while I scraped by on scholarships and part-time gigs, now positioned herself as the family mediator when her own life glossed over the imperfections that made us human, subtly steering the discussion toward the pregnancy's origins by mentioning how the father reminded me of those extended lake house weekends from our teens, the ones filled with boat rides and evening barbecues where certain guests lingered in conversations that felt charged even then, a clue dropped like a breadcrumb trail leading back to alliances my parents had fostered for years without anticipating the personal entanglements they might spawn. Her frustration mounted as I deflected direct questions about his identity, insisting it was a law school acquaintance whose guidance had been invaluable yet complicated. But the tension peaked when she accused me of harboring jealousy over her stability, a charge that ignited my next layer of revenge not in the heat of the moment, but in the calculated aftermath, as I watched her storm out after an hour of circling arguments, her parting shot about needing to protect the family image ringing hollow against the backdrop of my own resilience, forged in the fires of overlooked potential. Alone again in the dim light filtering through the blinds, I felt the weight of her words mingling with the subtle thrill of holding the cards close, but the dilemmas they stirred were undeniable, forcing me to confront how my choices, like prioritizing this secretive standoff over reaching out for genuine support during prenatal appointments that revealed the baby's robust development, might be painting me as the obstinate outlier in a story where reconciliation could offer practical lifelines. such as shared childcare or financial cushions against the uncertainties of entering the legal workforce as a single mother in a region where traditional values still influenced hiring biases. Dad's call came later that afternoon, his voice gravelly and insistent through the speaker as he demanded the original letter's return, claiming its provocative language was fueling rumors at the plant that threatened his standing after decades of loyalty. But I responded with a witty deflection that highlighted how his own past whispers from the 80s, now amplified online, mirrored the scrutiny he applied to me, leaving him sputtering on the line while I hung up with a sense of poetic justice that tasted bittersweet amid the growing isolation. Emboldened yet uneasy, I took the evening to enact a more targeted retaliation, reaching out anonymously to a local reporter I had networked with during my internship, feeding details about Rebecca's seemingly flawless engagement that concealed her fiancé's penchant for late-night networking events bordering on indiscretion, phrased in a way that suggested cracks in the facade without outright slander. A clever maneuver designed to force her to defend her pedestal and perhaps glimpse the vulnerability she so readily dismissed in others, the satisfaction of which carried me through a restless night where dreams of courtroom victories intertwined with visions of family bonfires long past. The following morning brought a shift in the atmosphere as sunlight pierced the room, illuminating the disarray of my temporary life and prompting a flurry of emails from potential freelance clients seeking basic contract reviews. Opportunities that promised a modicum of independence, but required navigating the ethical tightrope of disclosing my situation in a profession that prized objectivity above personal turmoil. Rebecca's frantic texts arrived in waves, quizzing whether I had any hand in the budding story that had her fielding questions from colleagues, but I replied with feigned concern and light-hearted quips about karma's long memory. All while the conflict simmered internally as I weighed the cost of my revenges against the impending reality of motherhood in a support vacuum. Just as I prepared to head out for a routine checkup, a knock at the door delivered an unexpected package from Mom, its plain brown wrapping tied with string and addressed in her familiar cursive. Containing not words, but an old keepsake from those lake house days, a tarnished silver bracelet engraved with initials that linked directly to the father. Its arrival stirring a whirlwind of memories and suspicions about whether she had begun unraveling the threads I had so carefully guarded, leaving me frozen in place as the pieces of our shared history threatened to snap into a configuration none of us could ignore. Unwrapping the package from Mom in the quiet confines of my motel room, where the afternoon light slanted through half-drawn blinds casting elongated shadows across the rumpled bedding and scattered remnants of my makeshift office setup, revealed not just the silver bracelet, but a cascade of suppressed memories that flooded back with the intensity of a suppressed deposition finally breaking free, the engraved initials on its clasp, TH, stirring recollections of lazy afternoons at the lake house, where Uncle Tom, Dad's longtime business associate and the firm's occasional consultant, had fastened it around my wrist during one of those family barbecues. His casual advice on pursuing law school laced with a warmth that felt paternal yet edged with something more personal that I had dismissed as youthful naivety back then. The bracelet's arrival, tucked amid faded snapshots from those vacations showing Tom grinning alongside our family during boat outings and evening card games, felt less like a random gesture and more like Mom's tentative probe into the enigmas I had woven into that letter. Her choice of this particular keepsake hinting at suspicions she had harbored for years about Tom's frequent visits and the way his conversations with me lingered longer than protocol dictated. A subtle clue that now amplified the uncertainty swirling around my pregnancy and the father's role in appending the life I had envisioned post-law school. As I clasped the bracelet around my wrist, feeling its cool weight against my skin amid the subtle curve of my growing belly, a wave of conflicting emotions washed over me, blending nostalgia for those simpler summers with the sharp pang of betrayal realized, forcing me to confront how my entanglement with Tom rekindled during that internship where professional mentorship evolved into stolen moments in conference rooms had not only complicated my career launch, but also positioned me as the unwitting catalyst for a family implosion that no amount of legal training could litigate away. The dilemmas intensified over the next couple of days as I juggled the practicalities of impending motherhood with the relentless pursuit of employment stability. Arriving early for a job interview at a small family law practice in the adjacent county where the senior partner grilled me on case precedents while I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, the loose blouse doing little to conceal the early signs of pregnancy that clashed directly with the afternoon prenatal appointment I had rescheduled. Twice already to accommodate this opportunity, a choice that left me inwardly cringing at the necessity of glossing over my personal circumstances in responses that bordered on deception, fabricating tales of robust support networks back home to mask the isolation that had become my daily companion. These disagreeable decisions, born from the harsh realities of a job market that favored polished resumes over raw potential, especially for women navigating single parenthood in conservative Midwest circles, made me question whether my pride in holding back the full truth about Tom was empowering me or merely prolonging a solitude that could jeopardize the baby's health and my own mental fortitude, as evidenced by the restless nights where doubts about nutritional choices and delivery options looped endlessly in my mind like unresolved motions in a stalled case. Rebecca's communications grew more insistent during this period, her messages oscillating between veiled threats about escalating the family intervention and reluctant admissions that the reporter's article had forced uncomfortable conversations with her fiancé, whose own indiscretions now mirrored the hypocrisies she once overlooked, providing me with inadvertent ammunition that I tucked away for the right moment while responding with humor-tinged deflections about how life's plot twists kept us all on our toes in this drama we called kinship. Seizing upon the simmering tensions as fuel for my next act of revenge, one that promised to be as strategically layered as any cross-examination I had prepared in moot court, I proposed a neutral family dinner at the old diner on Route 60 SIX's outskirts, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and endless coffee refills that evoked memories of road trips where secrets were shared over pie, suggesting it as an olive branch while inwardly plotting the ambush that would force them to confront the veiled accusations head-on without granting me the immediate fallout of full disclosure. The evening unfolded with an undercurrent of forced civility as we gathered in the vinyl booth, Dad nursing his black coffee with gruff nods and Mom fiddling with her napkin while Rebecca arrived late from Chicago, her presence adding a layer of polished tension to the greasy spoon atmosphere, and I waited until the entrees arrived, burgers for Dad and salads for the rest, before steering the conversation toward the lake house legacy, casually remarking how certain traditions there had shaped my choices in ways they might not have anticipated, my hand absently tracing the bracelet as I mentioned the baby's due date aligning suspiciously with Tom's annual legal conference that Dad had co-hosted for years. The air thickened with unspoken realizations, their faces registering flickers of dawning horror as I accidentally let my phone screen light up on the table with an old email thread from Tom discussing internship feedback, the sender's name visible just long enough to plant the seed before I pocketed it with a wry comment about how privacy laws applied even to family chats, the witty orchestration of the moment leaving them exchanging uneasy glances amid bites of cooling food while I savored the shift in power dynamics that made the diner's fluorescent hum feel like the buzz of a courtroom victory. Driving back to the motel under a starless sky, the adrenaline from the dinner's subtle chaos mingling with the fatigue of another skipped yoga session to accommodate the evening, I reflected on how these revenges, clever though they were in exposing hypocrisies without direct confrontation, carried the risk of deepening the rifts rather than mending them. Especially as prenatal literature on my nightstand warned about the stresses of unresolved conflicts impacting fetal development in ways that made my strategic withholdings feel increasingly reckless to anyone observing from the outside. Rebecca's parting text hinted at brewing storms, questioning the email's implications with a sharpness that suggested she was piecing together fragments faster than I preferred, and Mom's voicemail followed suit, her voice thick with emotion as she alluded to discussions with old acquaintances that had unearthed uncomfortable truths about Tom's reliability over the years. Precisely 1 week after That fateful homecoming dinner, as the clock ticked past 9 in the evening and I prepared for bed with a cup of chamomile tea to soothe the day's upheavals, a persistent knocking rattled the motel door, compelling me to peer through the peephole where my parents stood silhouetted against the hallway light, their faces streaked with tears and expressions etched with a desperation that begged for entry and answers before the fragile threads of our family unraveled completely. Peering through the peephole at my parents standing there on the motel's dimly lit threshold, their figures hunched against the evening chill with Dad's usually steadfast posture bent under the weight of visible anguish and Mom's cheeks glistening with trails of tears that caught the fluorescent hallway glow, sent a jolt through me that mixed triumphant vindication with an unwelcome surge of empathy I hadn't anticipated after the cascade of rejections and calculated withholdings that had defined my strategy since that disastrous dinner, compelling me to unlatch the door and step aside in a gesture that felt more like reluctant mercy than enthusiastic welcome, ushering them into the cramped space where the scent of my chamomile tea still lingered amid the scattered prenatal notes and the soft lamp illuminating the ultrasound images on the wall. They entered hesitantly, Dad clutching the now-worn letter like a talisman against the unraveling truths it represented, while Mom collapsed into the room's single armchair, her hands twisting in her lap as she choked out fragmented apologies for the whispers that had driven me away and the favoritism that had festered unchecked for years. Her voice cracking with admissions about how the bracelet's delivery was her fumbling attempt to bridge the gap without demanding answers outright. But the conversation quickly pivoted to the core revelation they had unearthed through a series of pained discussions with mutual contacts in the business community, piecing together the hints from my letter and the dinner's veiled allusions to confirm that the father of my child was none other than Uncle Tom, Dad's trusted partner of over 2 decades who had woven himself into our family tapestry through those lake house retreats and professional collaborations that masked deeper personal entanglements I had navigated in secrecy during my internship. The name hung in the air like a verdict delivered in a hushed courtroom, Tom's recent divorce from his long-suffering wife and our rekindled connection, sparked by late-night strategy sessions that blurred into intimacy, explaining the timeline of my pregnancy in a way that transformed their initial outrage into a profound betrayal that shattered the illusions of loyalty and mentorship they had clung to. Dad's face crumpling as he recounted confronting Tom earlier that day only to receive evasive denials laced with half-admissions that confirmed the worst without offering solace. As the hours unfolded in that confined room, with the outside world reduced to the occasional rumble of passing trucks on the highway, they poured out layers of regret that peeled back the family facade I had long resented. Dad confessing how his elevation of Rebecca stemmed from his own insecurities rooted in that long-buried affair from the 80s, which my online nudge had painfully resurrected, forcing him to confront parallels with Tom's indiscretions that made his judgments against me feel like projections of unhealed wounds, while Mom revealed her quiet suspicions during those vacation years about Tom's lingering gazes and extended stays, choices she had rationalized away to preserve the harmony that kept our household afloat amid Dad's demanding job and the economic pressures of raising 2 ambitious daughters in a suburb where appearances mattered as much as paychecks. The growing conflict peaked as their pleas for involvement in the baby's life clashed against my guarded boundaries, dilemmas that made me hesitate because while their tears evoked a flicker of reconciliation's appeal in a culture that romanticized family redemption stories, my history of impulsive decisions, like delaying this full disclosure to wield it as leverage, now struck even me as a form of self-inflicted isolation that risked alienating potential support at a time when prenatal stresses and career uncertainties demanded a network beyond my solo grit. Sensing the moment ripe for my final revenge, one that channeled my legal training into a maneuver as sharp and satisfying as any settlement negotiation, I retrieved my laptop from the bedside table and opened a document outlining a proposed partnership restructuring for Dad's auto parts venture, clauses meticulously drafted to capitalize on Tom's impending paternity by tying his financial contributions to equity shifts that would secure my future stability without outright confrontation. Presenting it to them with a wry explanation that this was the price of re-entry into my world, A clever twist that left Dad staring in stunned silence at the irony of law, his and my shared passion, being turned against the very alliances it had built, while Mom whispered tentative agreements laced with hope for mending what remained. Yet as dawn crept through the blinds, painting the room in soft grays and casting long shadows over the emotional wreckage we had laid bare, the weight of it all settled into an ambiguity that lingered like unresolved testimony in a mistrial. With Rebecca's promised involvement hanging in the balance as she texted updates from Chicago about her own reevaluations of perfection's cost, and Tom's silence on my voicemail a wild card that could either solidify his role or vanish into the ether of avoidance, leaving me to ponder whether the revenges I had orchestrated, witty and empowering in their execution, ultimately healed the scars of favoritism and rejection or merely etched new ones into the bonds that defined us. Watching them depart with hugs that felt fragile yet genuine, the bracelet still warm on my wrist as a symbol of tangled histories, I stood at the window tracing the baby's subtle movements within me, questioning if blood ties could truly outweigh the betrayals that had tested them, or if the path to self-worth demanded walking alone into an uncertain horizon where forgiveness remained an open question, one that echoed the dilemmas of countless women balancing ambition, motherhood, and family legacies in the quiet heartland.